Well, I heard a story the other day about an Irishman. His name was Seamus. And Seamus walks into a pet shop, and he walked right up to the desk, and he said to the person behind the desk, "Do you have any budgies?" And the person said, "Yeah." "How many do you have?" He said, "I think maybe we've got 99 left." Seamus says, "Well, I'll take the lot." And the clerk looked at him, a little curious, but he got out a couple of boxes, and he put the budgies in the boxes, and Seamus settled up with him, and off he went with the 99 budgies. Next stop on the high street, it was the tailor's. He went into the tailor, and he says to the tailor, "Do you think you could take my jacket and sew 99 pockets into it?" And the tailor looked at him quizzically, but said he could. So he gave him his jacket, and the tailor went off for an hour or so and came back with the jacket with 99 little pockets all around, all over the place. And so Seamus puts it on and settles up with the man, and he takes the budgies and he begins to put one budgie at a time into the little pockets. And he walks out and goes back onto the high street, and he walks down to the post office tower, which was the highest building in the town. And he went into the post office tower, and he walks up and up and up. He's at the top, and he goes out on the roof. And he looks down, and he says a prayer, and he jumps. Well, Seamus landed with a great thud right on the ground. Sorry, Tamara, that she jumped. It was a great thud right on the ground. And he's lying there, and he's groaning, and he's groaning. And the passerby comes along and says to him, "What are you doing, Seamus? What happened?" And Seamus is groaning, and he says, "I don't know, but that's the last time I'm going to do that budgie jumping." Sorry. Well, when you have an Irish minister and Sunday falls on the 17th of March, what do you expect? But anyway, why not talk about St. Patrick? St. Patrick's, it's become a great day of celebration. And as the day goes, people all over Ireland and the British Isles and North America and Australia, they don the green and they bask in their Irish heritage, whether they have it or not. And many of them will knock back copious amounts of liquid. And I've wondered at times what St. Patrick thinks of all this, but we'll never know. When we speak about St. Patrick, we have to travel back in time, way back past the Reformation and the Middle Ages, back to the time when the Roman Empire was crumbling. And we need to go over the ocean to the edge of the Roman Empire, which was Britannia, Britain, and to the outer reaches of Britain into Wales and a little town named Banwan. And there it's thought that Patrick was born, and he was the son of a priest and a Christian mother back in the days when priests could marry. And he lived and he grew up in Banwan. Just after he was 16, a group of Irish raiders, those bad people, they just came over into Wales, and they took over a couple of towns, took a whole pile of stuff, and took some people, including Patrick, with them. They brought Patrick over to Ireland, and they sold him into slavery. And he was bought by a man named Miliac, and he was said to he's said to tend sheep on the hillside around Slemish Mountain. Now, Slemish is in the northeast of Ireland, and it's a beautiful spot, grass-covered hill, and an ancient volcanic plug rises up from relatively flat surrounding countryside. Anyway, for 6 years, Patrick was there and worked on the hillside and suffered sometimes from solitude and anguish and hunger, and didn't have many clothes. It was particularly a problem in the winter and the cold. And he says that he maintained a will to live only because he discovered the faith that he had been taught as a child in his home. And he began this intense life of prayer. And in his confession, St. Patrick writes, "After I had arrived in Ireland, I found myself pastoring flocks daily. And I prayed a number of times each day. More and more, the love and the fear of God came to me. And faith grew and my spirit was exercised until I was praying up to 100 times every day, and in the night nearly as often. And this even when I was staying in the woods and on the mountains. And I used to get up for prayer before daylight, through snow, through frost, through rain, and I felt no harm, and there was no sloth in me, as I now see, because the spirit within me was then fervent." Patrick's faith was such that Christianity became an integral part of his life and his thought and all that he believed. There was a great poem written in the 9th century that has led to a hymn that we sing. And I wonder if you could sing it with me, this first verse, "Be thou my vision." Can you give us a key, Rick? Any key will do, almost. There we go, that's it. Be thou my vision, O Lord of my heart. Not be all else to thee, save that thou art. Lovely. Well, Patrick's faith, it grew and grew, and his years of enslavement were long, but then one night he has this dream, and in the dream he was told that a ship has been readied for his escape, and trusting in this voice, he made a journey. 200 miles, he says. 200 miles, which must have taken him to the south of Ireland or the southwest, and to a port, and there he met a group of sailors that took him to Gaul, modern-day France. And from there he traveled across Gaul, and he made his way back to Britain, and then from there made his way back to his own hometown. And he stayed for a while, but it wasn't long before Patrick felt this call to go into the priesthood himself. And he went back to Gaul to study, and tradition has it that he studied at the monastery of St. Martin of Tours and the great centers of Lorraine and Auxerre. And a little later, when he wrote the confession, it seems that he mustn't have spent an incredibly long time in formal studies, but during this time he learned the Word of God, and he had a strong faith in his heart. And he returned home, stayed with his parents for a little while longer. They were eager for him to stay, as all parents would be, but then he has this other vision, a vision that comes by night. And he said, "I saw a man coming, as it were, from Ireland. His name was Victorious, and he carried many letters, and he gave me one of them. I read the heading, 'The Voice of the Irish.' And they said, 'We appeal to you, holy servant boy to come and walk among us. I was pierced by great emotion and could not read on, so I awoke. Well, the next night, there was another vision, and Patrick knew that he was being called to Ireland. He asked who it was speaking to him, and the reply came, "He who gave his life for you, it is he who speaks with you, Jesus." And Patrick awoke, and he was full of joy, and he had given his life to Christ, and he knew what he had to do. And that hymn goes on. Sing it with us again. Be thou my wisdom, and thou my true word. I ever with thee, and thou with me, Lord. Thy true Son, thou in me dwelling, and I with thee one. That oneness Patrick was feeling with God. And Ireland at the time was one of the few parts of the known world in which Christianity hadn't come yet. And Irish lore has it that in the early days of Patrick's time back in Ireland, the old Celtic feast of Beltane drew near. And it's a spring festival, and a spring festival to the sun god Bel. And during the feast, the lore has it that all the fires in Ireland had to be put out, extinguished. And then the king, the high king of Tara, would light a fire on the hill of Tara, and from that fire, all other fires subsequently were to be lit. Well, Patrick knew about this, and he set up a bonfire on a hill nearby, the hill of Slane. And at Slane, he lit this fire before the king had lit his fire. And he was signifying to all people, things were changing in Ireland, and signifying that a new light was coming to the country of Ireland. And, of course, this didn't go down well with the king of Tara. And he sends his soldiers over to see what was going on and bring the culprit over to him. And so they captured Patrick, and while traveling over to Tara, Patrick is said to have chanted the hymn known as the breastplate of St. Patrick, or the Deer's Cry. And he's walking towards the king, and as he was chanting this prayer, all that the king could see was a herd of deer. And so Patrick was able to pass by, and his life was saved. And the lines of this ancient hymn outline a tremendous trust in Jesus Christ. You've probably come across parts of it, and the way the Celtic Christianity could see the omnipresence of God. It goes like this: for my shield this day I call, Christ's power in his coming and in his baptizing, Christ's power in his dying on the cross, his rising from the tomb, his ascending, Christ's power in his coming for judgment and ending. Be Christ this day my strong protector, against poison and burning, against drowning and wounding, through reward wide plenty. This is the peace you maybe know: Christ beside me, Christ before me, Christ behind me, Christ within me, Christ beneath me, Christ above me, Christ to the right of me, Christ to the left of me, Christ in my lying, Christ in my sitting, my rising, Christ in the heart of all who know me, Christ on the tongue of all who meet me, Christ in the eye of all who see me, Christ in the ear of all who hear me. For my shield this day I call a mighty power, the Holy Trinity. And as I said, the lore says that Patrick was allowed to pass by. All the king could see were a herd of deer. And our hymn has a similar verse. Let's continue. Be thou my battle shield, sword for the fight. Be thou my dignity, thou my delight. Thou my high tower, raise thou me heavenward, O power of my power. I want to do a little aside here, just on the basis of that word, that phrase, thou my high tower. Notice the words, thou my soul's shelter, thou my high tower. This past year when I was over in Ireland, I made what seems now to be a regular trek to a place called Glendalough. And in Glendalough, it's the ruins of an ancient monastery of St. Kevin. And beautiful, beautiful. And then if you go up past that, there's a lake, mountains sweeping down into it. Just stunning in its beauty. But in the area where the monastery was, there's a high tower. And you can see it there. I should have enlarged that picture a little more. There's another slide after that one that has it a little better. And those towers, there was only one way into it. And it was about 12 feet off the ground. And word has it that they would have a ladder. And if there was any danger, up they would go into the tower. And they would then pull the ladder up behind them and close the doors, and that was it. So the tower, then, it had 6 floors within it, and then at the very top were some lookouts. And you think of those words again. Thou my soul's shelter, thou my high tower. That place where you could go for safety from bandits and people attacking. Raise thou me heavenward. They'd go to the top of the tower, place where you're nearer to God. And in ancient culture, they always liked to be in high places because that's where they perceived God was. And you get that in the ziggurats, in places like the ancient Near East and in Mexico. And you have these step buildings, and the highest place was where the priests went. Because they believed that God was in those high places. Anyway, little aside. Patrick, let's get back to Patrick. Spent subsequent years in Ireland and had a strong sense of his call and his purpose and this desire to follow Christ's call and to take the gospel to the farthest reaches of the world, which was Ireland at that point. And he says this in his confession, consequently, I take this to be a measure of my faith in the Trinity, that without regard to danger, I make known God's gift and the eternal comfort he provides, that I spread God's name everywhere, dutifully and without fear, so that after my death I may leave a legacy to so many thousands of people, my brothers and sons, whom I have baptized in the Lord. And I think that would include sisters and daughters as well. But Patrick is said to have taught the people from what was available to him. He found the shamrocks, for instance, and it was a great way to get across the whole concept of the Trinity, the one God in 3 persons, and he pointed to the different leaves, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, that with one stem, all united. And he was loved by the Irish. Perhaps it was because he was able to get the gospel across to them in their own tongue, in the Irish tongue, which he'd learned during his first time there, looking after the sheep on the mountains. But also, it was because Patrick aligned himself with the Irish. There is one other writing that's attributed to St. Patrick, and it comes from a terrible event that happened in Ireland. Now, these raiders would go both ways. The Irish would come over and take some people over there, but raiders would come from Wales and other places in Britain. And this one Roman and British captain named Coroticus raided Ireland, and he killed quite a number of people, and he took a bunch more back to sell into slavery in Britain. And Patrick was absolutely appalled because these were people that he had baptized. They were Christians. And he writes to Coroticus, who is this Roman captain, supposedly a Christian, and he says, you've taken these innocent brothers and sisters whom I baptized, and he says, you are nothing but an enemy of Christ who has committed fratricide. And as Patrick defends the Irish Christians, he has this phrase in it that's very like, do you remember the time when terrorists took over the Charlie Hebdo building in Paris and killed a few people there, and everybody came out and they said, "Je suis Charlie." Like, I am Charlie. It's like Patrick says, I am Irish. Je suis Irish. And Patrick scholar Dana Roberts suggests that because Patrick risked becoming Irish, the Irish became Christians. And through his whole ministry, Patrick's faith buoyed him. And like other Celtic Christians, he entrusted everything to God. And he would just follow God to the ends of the earth and trust God to take care of him. A little bit like that reading that we had this morning where Jesus says, don't worry about your life. Don't worry about what you eat or your body, what you will wear. Consider the ravens. They neither sow nor reap. They neither have a storehouse nor a barn, and yet God feeds them. Are you not of more value than they? Don't strive after these things. The nations strive after these things. Your Father knows that you need them, but strive after His kingdom, and these things will be yours as well. Let's keep singing. Riches I heed not, nor man's empty praise. Thou mine inheritance, now and always. Thou and thou, our King of heaven, my treasure thou art. Well, we'll bring this to a close. Patrick died probably around 461, and his remains are said to lie under a stone in a town called Downpatrick in County Down. And near it, the government there has developed a center in which you can learn more about the person who brought Christ into the Irish community. And Patrick's legacy has been lasting. He traveled far and wide and took the faith to many people around. And Christianity caught hold in Ireland like perhaps nowhere else. With the fall of Rome, Europe started to disintegrate. And some of those years, because we have very little material from them, are known as the Dark Ages. There's very little written material. But you may have come across a book about how the Irish saved civilization. It's actually not a joke. It is because in the monasteries of Ireland, literacy was still prominent, and they kept records all during that time when the rest of Europe was sort of in the dark. And that it's because of their faith that they kept that going in the monasteries. And this deep Christian faith has continued in Ireland, so much so that Ireland continues to have one of the greatest amount per capita of church attendance, whether it be Roman Catholic or Protestant. It's got the greatest amount greater than most countries in the world. And it's still a strong part of Irish society. Well, Patrick's traveling and is trusting God for direction, for his mission, influenced many of his followers. And this became very important in Celtic Christianity. It's called the peregrinations of the saints, the travelings. And they used to travel and trust that God would lead them. They would be obedient. God would help them through, just like he helps the ravens and the birds of the air. And some of these old Irish saints, they would be known to set out in a boat. They wouldn't take oars or a sail. They would just push the boat into the water and trust that God would lead them where they were needed. And those journeys, of course, became a metaphor, in a sense, for the greater journey that all Christians are on, the journey towards God and the journey towards God's kingdom. And our hymn closes, and it suggests that the desire to follow God wherever God leads would continue through death into the world to come. High King of heaven, my victory won, may I reach heaven's joyful bright and sun. Heart of my own heart, whatever befall, still be my vision, O ruler of all. In everything, Patrick looked to God. May God be your vision also for this life and the life to come.